So my paper, as you see from the program, I've called it Societal Dismay and Ideological Disarray, Religious Reform and Everyday Social Dynamics in Zanzibar Town, or Seen from Zanzibar Town. December 2016, returning to Norway via Dar es Salaam, an airport employee, a young man who made the point of him being from mainland Tanzania, asked whether I had been to Zanzibar, in that place where all women were veiled to the point of covering their faces. No matter how I responded to the issue of veiling, he kept on insisting on how scary the veiled women were. Eventually, I suggested that he should visit Zanzibar to see for himself, to which he replied that he would be scared to visit a place with only Muslims, where all the women would be veiled. This brief conversation obviously reverberated the way current political discourse on the Muslim other is being framed, transformed, and absorbed in different localities. A phenomenon that, among others, Miriam Cook and Lila Abulokod has discussed in terms of Muslim woman. The aspiration of a label that reduces all diversity to a single or singular image. Generally, reductionist and essentialist positions manage to bypass historical, social, and cultural differences between and within society. In the case of Zanzibar, the comment above refers to an even broader context, where the construction of the Muslim other is only one among several elements fashioning the perception of the other within the unavoidable relation between the island and the mainland, which recently seemed not only to increase in tension, but also more often to be expressed in terms of religious difference. This paper thus discusses frictions between governance, belonging, and articulation of cultural identity in the wake of recent state engagement in religious practices and forms. Ethnographically, it focuses on lived Islam and emerging uncertainties regarding moral contestation and socio-cultural convention. To give some background to my interest in this theme, I should probably say that prior to the 2015 election, I witnessed how people I work with increasingly interpreted the content of political debates and statements touching upon the position of Zanzibar within the Union within a framework set by social memories of the 1964 revolution and its aftermath. Somehow, these interpretations and the reactions they caused were reiterated after the election, which once again reinstalled CCM in government, when restrictions were put on the media, civil society organizations, and political meetings. Public gatherings counting more than 5 persons were, according to interlocutors, to be considered political meetings. In urban Zanzibar, women and men expressed their apprehension towards the way restrictions on their everyday and ritual religio-cultural practices were being articulated. Following from these observations, I wish to discuss both in what manner government issued regulations on the one hand and critical reformist-inspired reactions on the other affect ritual and everyday life. To what extent may recent political and religious rhetoric, regulations and actions impact on social relations across social strata, cultural identities and generations? And how, as local contestations and negotiation of Muslim practices and conduct interconnect with social uncertainty and recollections of the immediate past? Clearly, within this picture, the interplay and fusion of culture, religion, and politics do involve the complex relationship between memory and reception. The ethnography explored builds upon fieldwork conducted among ordinary people in Zanzibar, a secular island state and Muslim society, which since 1964 is one of 2 states that together constitute the Union Tanzania. With a few exceptions, the women and men I have worked with have not been professionals and well educated. They have not belonged to any urban elite. So what I present then here would be what you could call a perspective from below or a ground-up perspective. The majority of those I have worked with are Sunni Muslims, although a few would be Shia, some are Christians, Anglican and Roman Catholics, and a few Hindu. People's ideas about how and what it means to be a good Muslim varies between them, and for several, their perception of what to be good Muslim life means has changed during their life trajectory. Since 1984, when I first started fieldwork in Zanzibar, I have noticed the kind of stereotypical statements referred to in the beginning of this presentation from mainlanders about this society and its first about their Arabic lifestyle and Arabicized Swahili, then about their backward Muslim practices and incapacity to modernize due to their Muslim faith. Zanzibaris have usually retaliated by referring to how, I quote, the mainland aims to eradicate Zanzibar as a Muslim society and independent state, ignoring its historical past. In this sense, the airport conversation referred to above should also be seen in the light of the long-term politics of Tanzania's ruling party, Chama cha Mapinduzi, formed by the 1964 revolution in Zanzibar and the following union between Zanzibar and Tanganyika, and from a Zanzibari position also as a result of the more recent and general discontent with the idea of the union as such. Until today, many at least, if not most, islanders perceive that Zanzibar is politically controlled by the Dodoma government and thus see the union as a threat to the island's autonomy, as well as their Muslim way of life and its historical complexity. In today's everyday life political rhetoric, recurrent themes further include the recent influx of what is often labeled Christians from the mainland. These discourses reverberate political tensions linked to national elections, the union issue, and the rewriting of the 1977 Constitution of the Union of Tanzania. In contrast to previous experience, today people tend to express their opposition focusing on religious distinctions, that is, claiming that they are ruled by political interests defined by mainland Christians. At present, regulations introduced in the wake of the most recent turbulent 2015 election seem to reverberate memories of the 1964 revolution and its aftermath, either people's own memories or those mediated by the parents' and grandparents' generation. These discourses seem to feed from a growing uncertainty regarding fundamental institutions and practices, as well as to their own socioeconomic well-being. Uncertainty refers here to lived experience and unease about acting in view of an unpredictable future. Time and again, women and men, especially those in the 30s and 40s, would, if asked, eagerly provide descriptions of how mainland politicians have infiltrated the elections of Zanzibar. What they expressed was obviously uncertainty regarding the future, similar perhaps to what Kai yesterday referred to as a climate within a climate of uncertainty. Remember, I was told, most of those who participated in the revolution were from the mainland. Quote finished. Some would elaborate further, claiming, for instance, that many of the newly built churches are actually meant to harbor young people from the mainland and to be warehouses of weapons and pangas. Interesting in these stories are how they repeat narrations from the 1964 revolution and how precisely these narratives in turn are reactivated by current and already existing uncertainties. People's reasoning takes the form of an as-if expected repetition of an event of the past. Yet their expressed incertitude feeds from their daily life experiences of moral and cultural marginalization, including the ongoing transformation and usage of public space due both to tourism, of course, as well as to what is claimed to be driven by mainland values and way of life. Current material of physical transformations commented upon, especially the opening of new restaurants and shops which actually advertise the fact that they sell pork. And during Ramadan, especially, these changes in public space is often labeled as being due to foreign habits, lifestyles, and values associated with the recent labor migration. These topics create heated debates among the islanders, interestingly so, independent of whether they are Muslims or Christians by faith. In different ways, everyday conversation indicate that the revolution could be repeated. And for Zanzibaris, the reference to the revolution, of course, carry a very, how can I say, it's a heavy, it's really filled of various meaning, but it indicates a particular form of social stratification on the one side, and also, of course, a particular form of racism. People talk about the recent trend among politicians as well as laypersons to apply labels like Wahindi, Waarabu, Wangasidia in public debates and manifestations. Why, they say, they never use such labels, if they refer to Waswahili. Doing this, they express their racism, said Abdul, a man in his late 30s. Zanzibaris of, for instance, Asian origin, will time and again contend that in periods of economic decline or election, some political voices would always utter that due to their Asian ancestry, they do not belong in Zanzibar. Fatma, a woman in her mid-70s, explained. Somehow, it is true that our place of origin is India, but we have never lived there. We have only lived here. This is where we belong. We have nowhere else, and this is where we are born and have lived. Still, given the unsettled political situation in Zanzibar and being of Indian origin, we can never trust that we will be politically and economically protected by our government. Taking into consideration that after the 1964 revolution, the ruling revolutionary state redefined the concept of citizenship and declared that in order to hold citizenship, one parent had to be African. The apprehension expressed in the above quote of a woman who experienced the revolution is thus understandable. Still, it should be noted also how this quote also expresses the extent to which a perception of belonging is inherent in the Fatma's approach to the human condition, to life, although she also hesitates to whether future political regimes will share her understanding. Her narration obviously reverberates how rumors evoke certain kinds of receptions, and how social memories of the revolution, including the politics of exclusion, formalized through specific regulation introduced in, for instance, 67, 70, 1971, limiting the possibilities of people of Asian and Arab descent to hold private enterprises, and so on and so forth. Memories seem to permeate all political discourse in Zanzibar, as well as personal narratives, especially of people who are about 40 years of age. These memories, together with actual political and economic circumstances which has played on nations of race and at the same time exposed the questions of autonomy. This word I can never explain. Autonomy. Yeah. Let me see. Although, despite all this, society has, however, managed to remain cosmopolitan. Yet, during fieldwork in 2015, I became aware that adult women and men in my surroundings suddenly expressed apprehension regarding how recently religion had become an obstacle in daily life. Using more or less the same words, they would say, "This is not how it used to be. Currently, even among us Muslims, some would claim that they can only be together with those who practice their faith or their faith in the same way as they themselves do. They behave as if they were mahshere. Whether people are Muslims, Christians, Hindu, Bohora, this never used to be a problem among the family, within neighborhoods or in social life. We would be close as family, neighbors, and friends, eat together, attend each other's weddings and funerals, and some would even intermarry. But now, everybody first asks about religion and says, he is Christian, she is Muslim, they are Hindus, and so on. Before, this was never a problem. During my stay in 1916, I was surprised of the very few number of Maulidia home, Dofu, Dikiri performances in urban Zanzibar. All devotional practices usually appreciated by both women and men. Make inquiries, especially adult and elderly women and men contended that today these locally moored and socially inclusive and gratifying practices would easily be seen as political gatherings mobilizing among Muslim Salafi doctrine by the authorities or by local Muslim revisionist-inspired groups. Due to restrictions put on the media, civil society organizations, and political meetings, their incertitude fed from recent political regulations and attitudes reverberated memories of the past. Elderly women and men who experienced the revolution and its aftermath again compare the present situation with their recollection of previous governance, including what they saw as the mainland government's persisting aim to undermine the historical and cultural foundation of their society and way of life. While earlier on, I was of the understanding that it was troublesome for people to talk about the revolution. Now they actually evoke narratives about the 1964 revolution as if it should figure as a blueprint to understand the political conflicts between mainland-driven and island-driven political agendas, as well as a format for interpreting recent conflictual issues between Christianity and Islam. They see the recent regulations and public gatherings as restrictions on public gatherings as restrictions on their everyday and ritual religio-cultural practice, and as a censoring and what they perceive as their socio-cultural lifestyle, their identity. Recent state engagement into religious practices is perceived as hampering with Zanzibariness, the shared values and cultural identity. Let me elaborate. After the revolution, fearing close ties of Islamic teaching with the Arab world, religious learning institutions were abolished, religious scholars dismissed, religious books were destroyed. As a way to discourage any possible incitement of anti-governmental unrest, emphasis was only put on the continuation of cultural aesthetics such as dress codes, cuisine, and notion of modesty and indecency. Only towards the end of the period of the late President Abu Jumbe, that means the early 1980s, efforts were made to revive Islamic learning institution, the teaching and transmission of morally correct behavior, that is bid'ah, as you mentioned. That time through Saudi Arabian assistance, including economic support for the building of schools and mosques. According to rumors, or rather what seemed to be common knowledge among the islanders, this project took place just at the time when the late president, entered a period of religious rumination. In 84-85, when my research focused on women's local knowledge practices, I spent time with women engaged in Islamic reformist teaching. Women from other milieux used to say that these women had studied too much of Somastan, insinuating that the reading had made them confused. However, according to the reformist-inspired, the practices and knowledge of local religious leaders were now to be neutralized in favor of a modern, literal, and morally correct version imported from Saudi Arabia. Thus, in 1983, a particular task force were introduced with the aim of providing advice on how to make use of the religious knowledge of young men who had then returned from studies in Saudi Arabia. Reading this report now, I notice how it repeatedly applied the terms fanatics and upusi, imprudent ribberage, when describing local Muslim convictions and understandings, claiming that these were only the constructs due to local religious leaders' ignorance and not moored in the true foundations of Islam. The report refers to the local Muslim leaders as blindly following ill-conceived learning to cultivate religion through locally configured Sufi-oriented practices like Bikiri and Maulid Yaqub. Still, the late President Jumbe's initiative did not have either an immediate effect or any dramatic consequences for ordinary people's religious life and their understanding of what it means to be a good Muslim. On the contrary, since the late 1980s until recently, I have witnessed how locally configured Islamic practices and rituals increasingly have been performed in neighborhoods and in public places in the afternoon, evening, and sometimes during nighttime, to the joy and contentment of the majority of the population. These ritual practices performed outside the mosques are definitely part of local Sufi-inspired reading of Islam, and obviously they have incorporated elements that could be understood as part of custom or cultural aesthetics, that is, mila. Nevertheless, late President Jumba's initiative did introduce a presence of reformist Islamic discourse. While the revolution and its aftermath did not uproot Islam, the post-revolutionary government created an environment where learning the principle of Islamic doctrine nevertheless was discontinued and public aspect of Islamic activity and rituals condemned. At the time, the dominant official political line was to downplay the role of religion and to disentangle religion from the conceptualization of identity and way of life. Despite the attempted silencing of Muslim knowledge and practices, together with the Africanization policy, most Zanzibaris continue to claim and live according to local convictions and their identity. However, today another kind of apprehension than what is directly linked with governance is equally present, and this links up to what has been discussed here about youth and the young, and their position within society. Some among the younger generation, who contrary to their parents' generation, have again had access to religious institutions, teachings, books, pamphlets, and discussion through the media in all its various formats, see themselves now as learned and as having scholarly foundation of their understanding of morality and knowledge and on their knowledge production. There are rigid discussions now about what constitutes correct Muslim practices and conduct, but not in the terms of bid'ah anymore. They question local forms, claiming that these should be suppressed now that they have access to proper Islamic learning, when they have become educated and modern. For instance, the 30-year-old son of a woman who locally is known to be learned in Islam, a Malimu, told his mother, I quote, "You know, to perform Dhikri and Mawlid Yahom is not really advocated in the Quran, not even in the Hadith. It is only a practice that came about many years ago when people had no access to education, when they could not themselves read the book. Nothing is wrong with performing these rituals, but it is not to be advised. They are costly and really more for entertainment than for devotion. To arrange these rituals also costs a lot of money. It makes people waste their resources, and it is not good conduct according to Islam." The young man's mother challenged her son, saying that he did not understand religion and only listened to the talk of the fundamentalists from abroad. However, similar kinds of comments and arguments from young people who see themselves as modern and educated seem to induce incertitude regarding locally configured religious learning and practices. So far, people are, however, not convinced by the educated reformist new rhetorics. Let me explain my point. Islamic missionaries from Pakistan are present in Zanzibar. They make themselves known by their green turbans and salwar kameez, which, according to people I work with, are wearing too short trousers. Often, Zanzibaris express their irritation regarding their presence in Zanzibar, such as, I quote, "They come from a different country. They are not here, and they are not from here, and they have no manners. We do not understand why they are here. It would be much better if they return to where they belong." Another one, "There are many these days, and currently because of the political situation and people's dismay with the newly imposed rules and regulations, they are introduced by the new union government. Their presence is particularly threatening. You see many of them at the market. People like me, dressed in Western fashion and without any shawl or bulbul, they call me kafir. This is because our interpretation of Islam and the Quran is different from theirs. Zanzibaris do not want to follow their dressing codes. Why do they come here? Why do they not stay at home and leave us alone to live our lives as we have always done?" And I will not, but another one would also then go on, and he would say, for instance, that they emphasize all the time the distinctions not only between Muslims and non-Muslims, but also between the good Muslims and the bad Muslims, and that is something that creates a lot of dispute, actually, among the among the Zanzibaris, this new introduction, which is then co-opted by many of the younger who are somehow fascinated by some of the reformist, the messages that are advocated by the reformist inspired. And then I will conclude. Social transformations in the post-socialist area since the late 1980s should be seen in the light of the reintroduction of multipartyism and the introduction of economic neoliberalism, including a fervid form of consumerism and fires tourism industry and the extensive labor immigration and increased local unemployment that comes in its wake. Women and men emphasize the importance of commonly shared cultural identity oriented towards a Muslim way of life, although recently their words carried a kind of nostalgia. Conversation would often start by "Unakumbuka zamani." The manifestation of how people experience a shared cultural identity that predominantly accommodates religious variation is further shown by the current locally claimed distinction between Zanzibaris who are Christians and Christians from the mainland. Whereas the former are first of all considered to be Zanzibaris, the latter are not. The majority of migrant laborers from mainland are Christians employed within the tourist sector, which has been highly sponsored by the government from the 1980s onwards, following the liberalization of the economy from the mid-80s. As migrants from the mainland settle more or less permanently on the island, its residents express worries concerning what they perceive as a transformation of their habitual environment. Today in Zanzibar town and in certain coastal areas, the impact of Christianity is apparent and manifests itself through the number of new churches that have been built and of the number of choirs performing in both public and private arenas. Not unlike what is happening in Europe, in fact, in the wake of immigration. An increasing number of labor migrants from the mainland settling on the island produces in Zanzibar a growing religious tension between the predominantly Muslim population and the newly arriving Christian mainlanders, mainly due to different lifestyles and values. In times of crisis and in the identification of the other as becoming the cause of everything problematic, has shown to be a winning political strategy for factions propagating the politics of exclusion in this society, at least since the late 1950s, with the political upswing of nationalist ideologies and the consequent enactments. Uncertainty and the feeling of unpredictability, of fear and unease may easily impair people's readiness to cope with their ability to act. Thus, the discourse referred to in the beginning of this paper reflects not only new stance of identity politics, but is also, on the part of the Zanzibaris at least, evoked by the political-economic subjugation and domination by mainland Tanzania, as well as frustrations due to rising levels of poverty experienced by the majority of the islanders in the context of a blossoming tourist industry, mainly operated by foreign and international companies. Moreover, emerging uncertainty regarding moral contestation of socio-cultural conventions in the wake of recent state engagement in religious practices and forms affect the transmission of a culturally specific lived Islam. Ordinary women and men hold that recently they have once again become apprehensive to the way restrictions on their everyday and religio-cultural practices are being articulated. It seems that they feel constrained from two sides, that is both from restrictions on the ritual practices by the state authorities, as well as by reformist ideas voiced from within society itself. By some caution that, for instance, Tikiri, Maulidia home, Dufu should not be performed, but in private, because otherwise it will easily be seen as political gatherings mobilizing among Salafi, Wahhabi Islamic ideology by the authorities. Others advise that indeed these practices are not grounded in correct Islamic teaching and thus should not be continued. They contend that these rituals, practices are inspired by mila, that is custom, and not actually correct according to Sunnah, to Islamic theology and the Quran. Often, they would add that until recently, the oral and practical knowledge transmission about the significance of the Kiri and Maulidia home were never questioned due to the illiteracy of previous generations. It seems that what was commonly considered good Muslim practice, as well as socio-cultural convention, are attacked from two otherwise contradictory voices. One from the governing political system that has evolved from 1964. The other voice reverberates from revisionist Islamic ideas. In the firing line, common people are left in disarray, feeling their cultural identity and way of life threatened.